Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Christy Stratus, historical fantasy and historical suspense author, and my awesome co-host, as you guys know, is sci-fi author David Kelly, and we are down a Richard H. Stevens tonight, unfortunately, but it's for good reasons. He's doing something very special with his daughter, so nothing bad going on. So we'll certainly miss him tonight. Lurking for Legends is an interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with any questions you might have for our guest or comment on anything that you hear in the show. So tonight we are chatting with fantasy and sci-fi fiction author Zachary Hagen. It is great to have you here, Zachary.
Hi,
Yeah,
Zach.
thank you so much for having me, you guys. I am excited to be here.
Absolutely. So let's start out with you telling us just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the details.
Sure. A lot has changed for me actually recently. I am teaching again. I had stopped teaching at the end of last year, but I got a call to teach again. And at the same time, I'm still a writer and an editor. I'm working on the editing process for my third book in the Eternal Chronicles series. And I also, my publishing house is working on getting a children's book out, hopefully by Christmas, but we'll see what happens. We're working with our first author besides myself, so we're excited about that.
That is cool. That must be very exciting for you. I would be a little bit nervous handling other people's books, but at the same time, so excited.
Yeah, I mean, there was a personal connection that existed there already, so that made it a little bit easier to do. But we're starting to work with an illustrator and a formatter that's worked with illustrations and text before. So I'm excited about the project. It's about a bunny and his sort of mischievous journeys and finding out that his mom still loves him even after he gets into big messes. So it's
Nice.
very cute, and I'm excited about it. It's a huge departure from anything else that we've put out so far at First Horizons, but it's exciting that we have new projects that aren't just mine.
That is really cool. And do you have a website specifically for your publishing company?
So right now it is still attached to the publishing services tab on my website. And we aren't actively looking for submissions. It's just kind of, if I encounter someone at this point. But in the future, once we have a few more projects under our belt, I'm hoping to open that up to other indie authors who are looking to work with a small publishing house.
Very cool. You know, other indie authors are always looking for a small publishing house. That
I
is
know
fantastic. That'll be great news.
yeah, it always comes with a lot more control for our authors. Obviously, that was why I started the publishing house, because I wanted to make sure that the vision, particularly for my first series, came across without any tampering from someone who just wanted to sell the book better. I really wanted the book to stand on its own and to be what I intended it to be without outside input.
I hear that. That's how I got into self-publishing. That's exactly how. I totally get it.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, and it turned out to be a really smart move considering what happened earlier this year with the New York publishing industry. Because, oops, trying to move this a little bit this way. Because I know that a lot of editors and assistant editors ended up leaving their publishing houses earlier this year. So I was like, oh, it's a good thing I'm not tied up with any of that, or any of my pending projects would be delayed by 2-3 years.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's a nightmare, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
I have author friends that it took weeks and weeks to hear anything back from the people that took over their projects after so many of those editors quit. So I'm glad that my books are still on schedule.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. It's so nice
mm.
when it's just up to you in that way. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I set up a publishing company for my own books as well, but it's like I'm not sure I would ever dare try and publish someone else's. It's like if I mess it up and it's mine, it's like, yeah, okay, I just messed
Right.
up, you know. But
Yeah.
if I mess somebody else's up, it would like, oh my god.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
understand.
that's one reason I decided let's go with something really simple first rather than
Mm,
something um
Mm.
because I have a friend that's working on a memoir right now, and I was like, if you're done with it in a year, because those things can take so long, we might look into it. But otherwise, I have really good information for other people that might be interested. Or if you want to self-publish, I can help you through that process. But it may not be the right time for us to take that project on specifically. So I think with publishing, it's a lot of timing it and making sure that the business is ready to take on a project like that.
mm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so it's just figuring things out.
So Zachary, your next release, I understand, is Eternity's Refuge, Refuge, which is the third in the Eternal Chronicles series. So
Yes,
could you maybe tell us a little bit about that series and the audience a little bit about that?
sure. So Eternal Chronicles follows the journey of Elior Barbadania, who is a bastard prince. Um, and he goes through quite a bit of transformation from the first through the third book, from losing his brother in a freak Magitech accident to um, a rescue mission that takes him from one side of the world to the other, um, to a journey that is wrought with sort of religious persecution in a sense. There's a lot of
Mm,
mythology and religion and politics kind of built into the lore of the books. So
Mm.
it's almost like the Spanish Inquisition, but in a fantasy world almost.
mm,
Wow. Yeah, yeah. Tell me what Magitech is.
So Magitech is the marriage between magic and technology. So I've sort
Oh.
of been building out the exact way everything works in the world. I have built and layered aspects of the magic system as I've written the books. So I've actually just figured out kind of the details of Magitech, but it takes magical items from around the world, like sand from an enchanted coral reef or sawdust from an enchanted wood, and integrates that into electrical technology to create something that couldn't exist without the other. So it's a marriage of the fantastical with the technical.
mm.
That sounds
Wow.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
I
mean,
like that.
one major project that one of my characters, Nereza, does in the third book is building a portal from one side of the world to the other, because um, Lux Terra is the name of the first place where they are, and the world is flat and is kind of like a coin, so it has a top side and a bottom side, and people live on both sides. And until the
Hmm.
second book, they actually don't know that the second side exists or that people are living there. They think it's all fairy tales and mythology.
Right.
So, um, in the third book, she's working on creating a way to get back and forth more easily um, than otherwise exists.
Mm. That flat Earth thing, huh? Cool. I
Yeah,
like it.
sort of. It's flat, but not in the sense that the flat earthers in our world think that the earth is flat.
That's great. I saw on your website, I think this is just the front page. I noticed that, like around halfway down, you have a little area that says "My writing includes," and it says heart, message, and joy, and you have a little something written underneath each one. I thought it was kind of cool that you have certain things that it sounds like you have goals of including, like sort of embedding in your work, and that you want your readers to know that those things are there. So like, is there any marketing strategy behind that? Or is that just sort of a, you know what, my works happen to include this and I'd like my readers to know about it?
I think that I haven't integrated it with a marketing strategy as of yet, but I think that actually might be a great idea. I think that anything that we do has to have a purpose behind it. I'm not one of those people that does things just because. And so everything that I write, I believe, has to have some sort of purpose behind it, that I'm putting goodness out into the world in some way rather than merely entertaining.
Mm. Yeah.
So that was more the purpose behind it. I consider it sort of a mission statement, because
Mm.
I'm going to write, if I'm going to put things out there, especially for my audience, which is largely young adults, early adults, and some teenagers, I think, have read and enjoyed the book or the series thus far. You know, early adulthood and adolescence is filled with such strife, and it's a time where we learn so much and we grow. And so I want to put things out there that are wholesome, that parents don't have any qualms about giving it to their kids, and that teaches life lessons in a way that doesn't feel like they're getting preached at.
Mm.
And so, I mean, really, Elliott's journey is it's really about self-discovery, but understanding that while he exists in himself, he also exists in a community, and figuring out what that community is and how he relates to it and what his place is in the world around him.
Mm. Yeah.
So I noticed you have a post on your website where you talk about your research process. And I think readers often assume that other than sort of things like historical novels and maybe thrillers, fiction writers, especially fantasy writers, just kind of like sit down and write and make it up and that's it. So it's interesting to hear that, as a fantasy author, you talking about, the process that you go through. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that and some of the things that you research?
Sure. So sometimes I research and sometimes I don't. For the Eternal Chronicles, I haven't had to do a whole lot of research. A lot of it was drawn from the inspiration, and a lot of it was drawn um, from really the beginning ideas of the story. But a couple things had to be fleshed out. Names of certain fantasy creatures that I knew that I wanted to include, but didn't quite know the spellings of names. So that was an aspect. Where I've really had to do more research are with projects that are still in the work outside of Eternal Chronicles. So I have an Aladdin retelling that I'm working on, that's written from the perspective of the princess. And because I wanted it to be very culturally aware of both its source, because Aladdin was originally written in that it was sort of taking place on the west of China. So there's aspects of that I'm drawing in, but I'm also drawing cultural influence from the Middle East and India. And because I don't live in those cultures, I really wanted to make sure that I was representing their mythology and their sort of fantasy lore accurately and in a way that made sense for the story. So there was a lot of research that went into the pre-writing process for that book. Aisha's Secret, which I'm not sure when we'll be releasing, but I'm hoping to have that out sometime in 2024. I want it to come out when the rest of the Eternal Chronicles are out. So I'm sort of just working on that incrementally at the moment, but it will be my main project after Eternity's End comes out next December. And I also have started the research process for another book that sort of was inspired by the COVID pandemic, in combination with Atlantis lore. So, epidemiology, the history of Atlantis and its cultural influences. There's actually, I found out through my research process there that there is a similar story to Atlantis that exists in Egyptian mythology. So my research process is mostly to make sure that I'm being accurate, because there's so many different cultural influences that I have represented in my work thus far. And I think that if I don't research that, I'm not necessarily worried about offending people because it's a fantasy book, so I can bend things to my will, sort of. But I don't want it to seem uninformed, I guess. I want it to be informed and representative enough that that people can tell that I'm referencing and showing different cultures in the book.
Yeah. And it sounds like you pick up a little inspiration on the way as well as when you're doing this research.
Yeah, it definitely influences how and what I write. I think that like even the royal system within Aisha's Secret changed a bit as I did the research into how Middle Eastern royalty tends to function.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That is interesting. Wow. Pretty cool. Well, since you're speaking of researching, we can speak a little bit about planning. You're a plotter, and I know you also have this nonfiction book here. It's actually a workbook, the novel planning workbook. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's included in that. I went to do the look inside and I couldn't see anything, so I want to know what's included.
Let me, because I have my PDF on my thing here, so let me open it up.
Great.
That was a fun project to put together. I actually haven't sold any of those, so if anyone is actually interested in having one of those, they're relatively inexpensive, and I think that it's a great little guide. Let me pull it. There it is. Okay. So it's a lot of these planning guides exist, and I think that it's finding what works for you. So mine has sort of some motivational kind of little snippets. My opening paragraph says, you want to write a book that is huge. Lots of people want to write books, but the trick is actually finishing it. Did you know that somewhere around 90%, 97% of all people who start books don't finish? That's crazy. And then I go into kind of the purpose of the book, that it will help anyone who uses it to be part of the 3% that actually finish. And it's inclusive of all sorts of writing goals, because of course some people really want to be published and some people just want to have that. So the workbook helps aspiring authors figure out what their why is. Why are they writing? Why are they sitting down at a computer to do that? There are places where they can define their story and kind of walk through what exactly they want it to look like. There are pages to plot out characters and the setting, so world building pages, and then to figure out if they happen to want to plot. There are pages for the sequence of events that they want and to kind of build out explanations. My process, I tend to do kind of a 1 to 2 sentence summary of each chapter first, and then I do kind of larger summaries to get a big picture. So I gave lots of pages for that. There's a word tracking page where they can write out their end goal for words and sort of guideposts for where they want to take breaks, things like that. So it's a very free form kind of book to give enough structure that the process of writing a book can feel a little less daunting, but not so step by step and this is exactly what you do that it feels constraining. Because I think that no author that I've talked to writes their book, even if they're a plotter, in the exact same way. For me, I have to have a general idea of what I'm writing in each chapter, even in each scene, if I break it up that far. But I don't go into nearly as much detail as some other authors where they're literally bullet pointing exactly what each character is doing or saying. So once I get into a scene or into a chapter, I pants it from there. But I give myself enough of a general idea so that I have a full sequence of events and I know what the story is before I start writing.
Yeah. So were you kind of like you were working on your own outline and were you thinking, why don't I put this into a workbook? Maybe somebody could use this to help
Yeah.
them plot.
Yeah. I loosened it up a little bit more from my process just because, like I said, I didn't want someone to feel constrained by how I do things. But I had so many, because I was teaching English at the time, and I had students asking me, how did you do it? How did you finish a book? I've always wanted to do that. I had friends that have wanted to write asking me, and I thought, this is a resource that's there, or a resource that I could create that could be there that answers those questions that people have been asking me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
so that
gave
would be good for really
it
any age, obviously, like your students or anything.
Yeah. I think it's just that writing a book, it feels so daunting until you actually finish one. Now, I have a process. I know exactly how to do it. I've done it 3 times now. I'm working on the fourth time. And once you've done it once, it's easily repeatable, I think. But it helps to have a beginning sort of structure. I did hours of research and watching videos on people's writing processes and how they went about finishing their first book. And I think having that condensed into here's a step-by-step guide. You don't have to do it exactly this way, but these are some good parameters to set for yourself if this is your first time writing a book.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. It's like I actually was just, funnily enough, I was reading a book on plotting yesterday, and yesterday was when I had abandoned it. It's like, when you start talking about sort of plotting the events of like chapters, kind of like all the way through the book and what have you, and it's like, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, I have no idea. It's like until my characters get to these events, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what their mindset is. I don't know, where they're going to, which way they're going to turn. And it's like, so, I mean, I do plan a little bit. It's like, I usually have, well, I usually know the sort of like the beginning and I have a good idea of the ending and maybe one or two little bits in the middle. But like, other than that, I'm kind of stuck. I mean, I wouldn't be able to write. I've tried it. And when I tried plotting it kind of thing, it's like, I just got so kind of like deep into the weeds that I couldn't make any progress. And then when I actually finally started to try and write it, it felt like I was writing inside a straitjacket.
Yeah, and I think that it comes down to different people's brains work differently. So for me, I've tried to write books without plotting. I didn't even realize that plotting was an option until I started writing Eternity's Well, and I started writing it in a creative writing class in my bachelor's degree, actually, and plotting was suggested. I was like, that's a thing that you can do. You can outline it like you can a research paper. My brain works better with outlines. I kind of think of pantsers and plotters as the difference between 3D printers and construction workers. So, obviously with a 3D printer, you're getting the entire thing with each pass. Every line of dialogue, everything there. So that's more pantsing. With plotting, a construction foreman is going to put up the frame of the house before they put any of the insulation or drywall or plumbing or anything like that into it. So I feel like that's kind of the difference. I know they can 3D print buildings now.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of technology, but that's kind of how I think of it, because for me, I get lost in the weeds when I try to, or I get lost in the details if I try to pants something. If I try to write a book without actually having a firm plot in place, I get so distracted by the tiny little details that I'll spend 5 chapters talking about things that aren't actually important to the direction of the story. And I've had that problem before. There was one book that I tried to write, I think when I was in either early high school or late middle school, which actually some of it ended up surviving. Some pieces of it survived into the Eternal Chronicles because the main character is a twin. But it was this weird, it was a portal fantasy where the portals between two worlds only opened on a blue moon. It's been 10 plus years since I visited that story, but it was about twins that were royalty from another world and somehow accidentally ended up in ours. That sounds mildly interesting. I might revisit it in some way someday. Now that I'm thinking about it again. Now that I know how to write a book, I might actually be able to turn it into something that is finished. Whether it would be good or not, I don't know. I'd have to fiddle with it.
That's how you'll plot it. You'll plot it to make sure it's interesting.
Yep, exactly.
Are you someone who, I can't do this. I could never do this. I've tried and tried. Are you somebody who can take like a character sheet and fill it out? Like it's one of these things where it's like, what's their favorite this? What's their favorite that? What color are their hair? Like, I don't even know the color of someone's hair most of the time until I'm writing.
Like mine.
I think Zachary is frozen, but in a nice position.
Yeah, at least he's smiling. That's good.
Hopefully,
if you're going to freeze, freeze when you're smiling.
Whenever I freeze, it looks terrible. It's always so awkward. It's always the worst.
Hopefully, he will come back. Oh, here he is. He's back.
It's doing it again. That was so weird. In answer to your question, I filled out a character sheet for a class. Beyond that, I don't really do it unless I end up getting lost with the character. And if I really need to get to know them, I will. But I think most of the time, the characters kind of come to me fully formed. Or because I write so heavily from one perspective or another, I get to know them as the main character gets to know them. And particularly with Eternity's Well, I spent so much time in the pre-writing phase really getting to know Eliar and his motivations and his perspective so well that it's easy for me to get to know other characters through him. And it's easier to do that than to have that character cheat sheet. Because if I did that, I'm afraid that I might, tell the audience something that they wouldn't otherwise know unless they were in my head. So I think it's easier for me to let them get to know the characters as Elior does. And the same goes for any book that I write. The main character will typically get to know the other characters pretty well. Eternal Chronicles is a little bit different at points because it's an ensemble. Elior is still the main character, but I do jump into the heads of other characters from time to time. But by the time I do that, I've usually set them up well enough with Elior that that it makes sense to be there. The only time I haven't done that was in the first book because all of them, the main cast needed to be introduced sort of as quickly as possible so that the rest of the story made sense.
Mm-hmm. And you do have, I think you mentioned this before, but you've got 2 books in the series plus a prequel. So, the prequel, I've heard different authors treat prequels differently. Some authors say, read the series, then read the prequel because they'll really get it. And other authors say, no, it really should come first. How is your prequel set up?
It's sort of bonus reading, to be honest. I wrote it as kind of a teaser or a reader magnet more than it's a very short 10-page read. So it's not difficult to get into it. It's definitely written differently than the other books in the series. It's not going to hurt someone not to read it. It's a cute little addition if they do. Certainly no one has to buy it. You can get it for free by signing up for my newsletter. It should automatically be pushed to you if you sign up for it. So it will, the only thing that it will really highlight is there's a chapter in the first book where they talk about, they briefly go over some of the origin story of the world. But beyond that, it's not really necessary to read, but it's a nice little thing to have if you happen to be subscribed to my newsletter.
Cool. Love little things like that.
Yeah. It's more bonus content than anything else, like a deleted scene.
Sure. Yeah.
So I noticed, Zachary, that you've been brave enough to venture into the world of TikTok.
Yeah.
How has that experience been, and would you recommend it to other writers?
I think that it would really depend. I've taken a big break from TikTok, partially because I actually moved twice this summer, so I didn't have a lot of time to devote to social media. And partially because it got so political after the overturning of Roe v. Wade that I needed to step back from it because I felt like the book talk community in particular, just got so heavily into it, and I needed to take a step back. I vote my conscience on things, but I don't necessarily want my TikTok or my social media presence to be political. It's actually against my employment contract for my political views to really be out there in general. And so I need to take a step back. So I recommend it, but I would put the caveat on there that I would really strongly recommend that authors really try to stick to their content and their purpose for being on there rather than getting swept up in the trends of politics on there. I'm strongly of the opinion, this is probably because I'm a teacher and it's against my contract and my personal beliefs that my political views are meant to be out there for people to see. But I really think that it's our job not necessarily to put forth a political agenda, but to put forth the goodness that we want to see in the world through our stories, rather than in opinions to alienate half of the country or half of the world, depending on what we happen to think. I think that there are universal truths that we can put in our books that don't have anything to do with who to vote for or what's going on in the world. But I'm a relatively private person in general. So that may be an unpopular opinion. Maybe people think that their political views are just as important as the content of their books. But I'd rather people know me for for my characters and how much they love interacting with them in the books.
Yeah, I think a lot of authors think differently in both directions, you know. So it's I definitely think it's personal, for sure.
Yeah,
Personal decision.
it absolutely is. And I'm not.
You lost him temporarily. He'll come back.
Yeah.
Can hear he's trying.
Yeah. He's not smiling this time, though. That's
This, yeah. It's making up for last time. Oh, it's starting to come back.
Are you there, Zachary?
I think it's rolling.
Seems like the internet is very slow. Maybe it slowed down a bit. Something.
We might have a storm coming in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that can ruin everything.
Yeah. Yep, I hear thunder. So that.
Oh, there we go. I heard that. Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Well, I did see that you have a Patreon. So if you want to tell people about that, that was a great time to do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't done a whole lot with it yet. But essentially what Patreon going to do is give away free copies of the book, and I'll be creating some merch for the end of the series next year. So that'll be exciting. I'm going to really put together some t-shirts with the book covers on them for next year, which I'm excited about. I'm hoping to put together a collector's edition specifically for Patreon that will include hardcover editions of all the books and t-shirts for all the books that'll come out with the final installment next December is when I'm looking at putting out Eternity's End. So between now and then, Patreon supporters will get, depending on the tier, they'll get a pre-release of either the digital, paperback, or hardback versions of the book. So just kind of depends on where their support lies. So if people want to check that out, it definitely helps to offset some of the costs of publishing, and it gives some nice perks to those who are in support.
All right.
I think I can hear the thunder there.
Yeah.
So I think because it sounds like you're having a bit of a storm there, Zachary, it might be a good point to finish this for tonight.
Yeah,
if that's okay with you. Okay, so next week our guest will be Dario Aguilar Peregrina, who writes science fiction, action, drama. He does music, sport, and he's also an author of multiple genres at the same time. He was born in 1997 in I'm struggling with this one, Iztapalapa, Mexico City. And his works have been awarded in the USA, Canada, and Latin America. Also, Dario is a columnist for the Latin Canadian magazine Hello Arte and hosts a radio program called Literatura Actual, Today's Literature. So that will be next week's guest on Lurking for Legends. And so, other than that, what's been happening in the Christie stratosphere?
So episode 4 of Corrupted Magic, which is the second book in Grimoire Society of Dark Acts, has gone live on Kindle Vella and on Patreon. The free episodes are only episodes 1 to 3, and you can get those also on Kindle Vella for free, and on my Patreon for free, and on my website. But if you want to continue with the book, then just make sure you join my Patreon. It's pay what you like, so you can just join for $1, and you can binge read it, and you can read the first book. And if you're a fast reader, you can read all that in a month. So you can really get your money's worth. So, that's what I've been working on. Finally finished episode 10, which took me a little while because there's quite a lot going on in there, a lot of emotions happening for my main character and stuff. So that always takes a little longer to make sure I get it right before we head into the next episode. So now I'm writing episode 11, and just keep in mind that we have multiple points of view in this one as opposed to the first book. So you get to see a lot of people's perspectives, and that is a lot of fun, especially since these characters are quite different from each other. So that is what I have been up to. How about you, David? What have you been doing?
That's amazing that you've managed to get so far ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, wow, that is crazy. Well, for me, things have been a little bit hectic the last kind of week or so, so I haven't got as much actual word count as I would have liked, but I'm on the last chapters of the first draft of Logan's World 3, and so it's downhill from here. I know where everything's going, so I'm kind of like pumping things out as quickly as I can. Other than that, on Thursday afternoon, I'm at the market here at Science North in Sudbury. So anybody who wants to pick up my books or get a book signed, they can see me there from around 1 o'clock until about 5 o'clock, as long as it doesn't rain.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been doing a good amount of events this year too. Lots of opportunity for people to come and see you.
Yeah, so that's it for me for this week. So on that note, I think we'll say goodnight, as we seem to be having problems with net connections and so on. So thank you, Zachary. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, everybody, for coming in and listening. And we'll see you next week. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much for having me.
I can't find my camera.